Hi folks, I'll get started then. So my name is Conor. I'm the Group Advanced Analytics Lead at Bank of Ireland. So like a lot of you, Bank of Ireland is on a journey. We're looking to become a data-driven organization. And that's begun with a lot of investment. Investing in data, investing in technology, investing in marketing automation and customer experience. My role is very much on the other side though. My role is to find a return on that investment. And with that, back further investment and push us forward on that journey. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we do that. Right? I'm not going to get into the technology kind of side, but more into the business and how we get that value, how we bring that return and help out the business. So, I don't think I've ever seen a picture so big of me, but that a little bit about me, a little bit about my background. I actually started in physics. I graduated from physics, like a lot of people in analytics, or at least the first generation of people in analytics. I developed that level of problem solving and numbers and data then into a career in banking. Initially, that was very much on the technical side, a lot of SQL and VBA in the early days, and into and SAS. Very much working on the risk side. So in credit risk, there's a lot of applications of data, and there have been for many years through IRB capital modeling, provisioning, loan loss forecasting, and then the last few years, regulation. A large drive from regulators want to see more and more about the banks and their data and standardized reporting from it. So that career kind of culminated in leading a team of over 40 risk analysts and taking on projects right across the whole credit risk spectrum. And then 2 years ago, I switched into working for our Chief Data Officer with the idea of kind of forming a center of excellence which would work right across the whole bank, right? Across the traditional areas like risk and marketing, but then expanding into new areas of the bank that didn't have analytics capability. So my role is very much at the center of it all, and it is very much in the mold of a translator and a leader and an evangelist for data. And in the end, it's about ensuring we achieve real impact, real business impact from our data. So there's two parts to my job. The first is really explained by this headline. We've achieved 58 million euro over the last 2.5 years in data value realization. So I work for, as I said, all the divisions right across the bank. We do work for corporate, we do work for retail, for HR, for audit, all of our different functions, all with the aim of finding value in the data. And I'm going to get into detail about what exactly we mean by that and how we achieve it. But in the end, it comes back to my goals. I have a 10 million euro target every year. That's the main thing I have to achieve with my team, 10 million euro of value. The second half of my job then is around collaboration. So I mentioned the bank has had analytics functions for many, many years. Marketing and analytics being the most obvious, marketing and risk being the most obvious. But we're starting to see other functions kind of emerge around different parts of the bank. And rather than centralizing them all, in order to retain the business domain expertise, instead we've implemented what we call a hub and spoke model. So the group data office where I work sits at the hub. We have the data, we have the infrastructure, the platforms, and the governance. And then we work collaboratively with customer analytics and marketing, decision science and risk, and then the emerging teams in fraud, HR, audit, and other areas. So I imagine a lot of people aren't familiar with Bank of Ireland, so I'll give you a little bit of background on it. We're the leading retail and commercial bank in Ireland. We're seeing a growing preference, like a lot of banks, for digital interactions. And with that in mind, we've invested €1 billion over the last couple of years in our core technology, right? So the core systems that underlie the bank. We have about 2 million customers, 267 branches. We've had a strategy really to retain our branch network, and we're 236 years old. So with that 236 years comes a lot of systems and a lot of data, which requires integration and understanding. We have a presence in the UK as well. We have a 20 billion pound mortgage book in the UK, and we have partnerships with the Post Office and the AA in the UK in terms of credit cards and loan business as well. And then we've niche international operations in Germany, in Frankfurt, and in the US as well, particularly around the corporate business. So to me, success in decision science or analytics is really about the intersection of technical feasibility, the data availability, and then the business impact. And that comes down to these 4 factors: data, technology, applications, and people. So the initial investment was very much on the data and technology side. Where I'm kind of putting my focus is more on the applications and the people. So how do we inspire new ideas? How do we prioritize those ideas then to the benefit of our customers? How do we collaborate across the different disciplines within the bank? And how do we motivate and develop our staff to achieve greater capability in the future? So the 3 pillars, as I call it, is how we do it. So value prioritization, design thinking, and agile delivery. And to me, this is where my team stands out and where we have an advantage that we're trying to build on as we move into the more advanced analytics space. I'm going to go through each of the pillars in turn and give you some examples and try to explain how they work to our benefit. But I'd emphasize from the beginning that they are very much interdependent how we deal with it. So I will refer to one as we're talking about the other and so on, which hopefully won't make it too confusing, but it is important to understand how they work together as well as the individual benefits of them. And hopefully that'll lead to some benefit for you to take away to your own teams. So value prioritization, I already mentioned about how this is about a return on the investment we've made in data, and that's really where it started, and that's the headline. But to me, it's really about how data science, as it expands, there's a fear that we're going to hit that trough of disillusionment as the hype expands. We've got to start showing to the business leaders, to the CFO that my area reports into, that there's value in what we're doing. And the importance goes beyond that headline. To me, it's really about what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. I mentioned a little bit about our journey. So we're quite slow to start. Our enterprise data warehouse, it's a Teradata box, was only really stood up in 2013. And then in 2017, we began this data value realization journey. We have over 70 systems now feeding into our data warehouse. We've got 400 systems in total, being, again, an old bank who's trying to effect a digital transformation. But we've seen a lot of change in the last couple of years. We've a new CEO who landed in 2017, and her arrival really started a changing of the guard in terms of the leadership of the bank. And that's opened a lot of doors for us. Right? As a kind of new generation of leaders have come through who know what we mean when we're talking about data and analytics, at least to the point where they know it should be of some value to them, even if they don't know why or how. It's opened a lot of doors for us and let us begin to push that change agenda. Then this year, our focus is actually turning more to advanced analytics. So we're bringing a data lake in this year and Cloudera for an advanced analytics platform and trying to take kind of the next step. So where we start is building a network across the bank. I mentioned we work right across the whole organization. So we start by trying to understand what are the pain points of the different areas, where are the potential opportunities for us. The tricky part, though, is that the business always starts with what? They always start with the end point. And we, in order to kind of get that value, to understand why they really need it, we need to push them back towards why. Because in the end, everything worth doing has a value. We just need to make them start to think in those terms. It's a very different approach even for me. When I worked in risk, it was effectively a firefighting area, right? We got regulatory requests in every day. We got requests in from our senior management and leadership of the bank, and they literally piled up on my desk. And I do actually mean a paper piling up on the desk. And which one we did first was really determined by regulatory deadlines, who was shouting loudest, whether it was my boss who was asking for it. You know, there was no real framework to decide where we should deploy our resources or what we should decide not to do. So that's why we try to push our business back to the why. We try to understand at a very basic level what's the value it's going to bring to the organization of delivering what they've asked for. So in very practical terms then, how do we get that stakeholder buy-in? We started with one-to-one. So we started by literally going out and knocking on the door of all the executives, the head of the mortgage business, the head of corporate business, the head of HR, and asking them what we could do for them. What was their strategy? What were the goals they were trying to achieve? And how could we support them in achieving it? Once we had some initial success, once we got the first couple of use cases over the line, it was all about show and tell. So this is really about building jealousy. So when the head of mortgages sees that the head of loans has a fancy new dashboard, he wants one too. Yeah? Any way of kind of getting it in and getting a hook to get a bit of attention and get them started. But show and tells were of huge importance to us. So at the end of a development of a new visualization, we'd try to get all the customers who were involved, all the stakeholders in, present it back to them, do a little bit of an explanation of how it works, a demo, and then have some invited guests too who might be interested, who might have further uses for it or might have their own business cases that we can build on. From there, we started to scale up and look at transformation. So we started looking at whether there are large-scale programs we can get involved in, which data obviously has a core part of in everything we do today. So we got involved in our own kind of core banking systems program. In IFRS 9 is a big regulatory program that's run over the last couple of years, and try to always be the data provider and then see where we can bring the value add in terms of the analytics side. And then most recently, governance is the last step. So once we got that initial momentum, started getting a long list of use cases coming in, we had to put a little bit of shape on it. And that involves agreeing that we should have a minimum value, that we can't do everything, to start to understand that there has to be a balance between the value and the effort involved. And we put a little more governance on it. So every value that we record has to be real. It has to be signed off by what we call a finance business partner. Essentially, the accountants have to sign off on it, and it has to be included in the budget. It can't just be a finger in the air number off the top of your head. Another thing our CEO brought in early on in her reign was this strategy pyramid. And this is a good place for us to start, particularly with new areas who haven't worked with us before. We focus in on this piece, the strategic priorities. So every division of the bank has to have goals under these headings: transform the bank, serve customers brilliantly, and grow sustainable profits. So a great place to start for us is literally asking them, what are your goals under those headings? And how are you going to achieve them? What decisions are you trying to make? And what information do you need? What insights do you need in order to make those decisions? And then back to, can we put a value on it? How is that actually going to impact the bottom line? So there's a lot of different types of value. Everybody always thinks of automation first, particularly when it comes to Tableau and the reporting side of things. And we have done quite a bit in the automation space, where we've taken on suites of existing reports or new reports that were going to require additional resources, and instead built them in Tableau using our enterprise data warehouse, and so fully automating it, fully productionizing it. But that's not where the big money is. Transformation is always going to supersede automation. So I'll give you an example. We recently were approached by someone in our business banking team with a horribly complex regulatory report that they deliver every month. Okay, so this takes up to a week of someone's time to produce on a monthly basis. It has lots of different data sources, lots of manual steps, and they wanted us to automate it. But now if you take that on an annual basis, you're talking about maybe a quarter of a person's job, so maybe 10, 20,000 euro a year. It's not a very big amount of money. And it would have taken us probably 6 months to develop the thing. Right? So you do have to balance that when you look at automation as to whether the approach you have today is actually the cheaper or easier approach and whether you really want to automate it. On the other hand, this same person had a target this year to hit 20% growth in their portfolio. And they, other than some of the usual kind of going out with the relationship managers, looking for trying to build their network throughout the distribution, they didn't really have a plan as to how they were going to have that uplift, how they were going to really have a step change from what they've done last year. So we gave them, we simply said, well, would you like to see what customers you have today, which, with very active current accounts but no lending? We can very quickly build something to show you who you could potentially target. So there's a real kind of cultural shift required with the guys too, that particularly as we mature, automation isn't necessarily where we always want to be. It's where we can do something different. It's where we can drive higher values. And again, we mentioned the relationship between value and effort is a key part of this too. So I want to give you an example of another real project we did, and particularly one where there were multiple types of value involved. So it starts with, this is in corporate banking. They had a bespoke standalone credit rating system, which has been there for a number of years, and is used kind of throughout our corporate banking teams. There were 2 manual extracts out of this system in the old world, which were delivered the first weekend after month end, because it took a weekend for the extract to run. One extract was delivered to our modeling team, and they manually loaded it into SAS. And another extract was delivered to our corporate banking team themselves, and they loaded it into Excel, and they ran pivots and produced reports. So given that they didn't get it until 7 days after the end of the month, and the data tended to be out of date as well as badly timed, and then all the manual processing, it could be weeks before they actually got numbers out of it. So we did what would probably seem obvious to a lot of people in the room. We created an end of week and end of month and later this year end of day extract into our enterprise data warehouse, and then allowed the modeling team to access that data directly using SAS Enterprise, and created Tableau reports then for the corporate banking team. Okay, so it's all end of week, data's refreshed automatically, and no manual effort involved. And this saved us €600,000 through a number of different means. So it reduced our operational risk, it reduced our regulatory risk, it saved resources in terms of the manual steps that were already there. It also created a cost avoidance piece for our modeling team. They were under pressure from the regulators to remove this 1 week time delay, and we resolved that without them having to bring in consultants and new IT extracts. So a couple other quick examples, just to give you an idea of the breadth of some of the work we're doing. We've worked with HR on, this is an automation piece, on building new dashboards in Tableau to save resources and introduce consistency of definition across the group. There was, I think 5 different definitions of how we count people. So we managed to get it down to a single approach across the whole bank. That saved about €250,000. We worked quite extensively with our treasury team on a non-performing loan securitization. The key piece here was, because we could give them full access to the data on a live basis, produce all the reports for the investors, and automate the data and the understanding kind of piece, we could retain servicing. So rather than selling the portfolio outright, we retained the servicing and securitized it. That's recently been made public. It saved the bank quite a lot of money, and a chunk of that then is obviously is down to my own team. And then on the profit side, a lot of work is ongoing around fees and charges. What the business has found a great benefit on this side is scenario analysis. So using Tableau, we can give them access to live data and allow them to flex the fees approach that they want to take with different segments of customers. So once we have an idea, and we know that we want to do it, and we know where it sits in terms of priorities with the other ideas, thanks to having a value assigned to it, we then have to get into how we design the analytic solution. And this is where we use design thinking. We have separate business partners, as we call them, or product owners in the agile sense, who work through these ideas with the business before our developer team gets involved. And that's what this stage-gated methodology really is about. Time spent on design is saved multiple times over in development, and we put a lot of focus on trying to ensure we have a full understanding of what the business requires before we get into the development stage. So the initial request is kind of what we've been talking about so far, the context, the rationale, who owns it, what's the value we want to put on it. The business review now is what I want to get into, how we actually design the output, how we engage with the business on an ongoing basis before we get into the solution design or the delivery, actually into the data availability, the feasibility, the effort, and actually building out our user stories. So really we're turning the focus to what the business actually wants in terms of a business outcome here. So design thinking, a lot of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with. It's a human-centered approach to solving problems. Really in a data science environment, to me this is about starting with the customer rather than starting with the data. So it's always very tempting, particularly for developers when they have the new tools and new data sets available to them, to just dive right in and start exploring what's possible. Design thinking gives you a framework to put around that problem, though. It makes us put the customer at the center and think about what's the objective you're actually trying to solve for. What's the business outcome that you want at the end, rather than what can you do with the data? What does the business need you to do with the data in order to achieve the value that you've set out? So in the end, it's about prioritizing the outcome rather than the method. We always keep our eye focused on what the business outcome is. So to illustrate this, I'm going to take you through three quick examples. It's really the journey that I went on in terms of exploring design thinking over the last year or two. So the first is one of those typical automation requests. Right? So someone on our finance team came to me with a suite of 5 daily dashboards that were produced on our deposit book. The person who was running these on a daily basis, it was most of her job, was being redeployed to another area, so they had to find a solution, an automation solution to continue delivering them. So straight away, they reassured me that all of the stakeholders still needed these 5 reports. They went out and they asked them. They said, yes, I still need them. So we couldn't shut them down. But we went out and talked to them again and asked that question, why do you need them? What we found bit by bit as we went through those 5 dashboards is that one customer needed a table here, the other one needed a number from that report there, the other one needed a line from that table. Nobody actually needed the full reports. Nobody used the full content. So rather than just automating what was there, keeping that legacy going for another 20 years, instead we redesigned it from scratch. And what we found is that one line that customer needed from one of the tables, we could just stick into an existing Tableau dashboard rather than building a whole new report. We found another number that was already in a Tableau dashboard, and they could actually get it daily and earlier in the day. And then we ended up building one more dashboard. Not 5, just 1. It was a lot quicker, it saved a huge amount of time, and it gave the customer exactly what they want rather than all this redundant information that we've been producing for years. And that gets us into this idea that redesign is always going to be more powerful than just automating. You've got to go back and think about what is the business outcome, what's the problem you're trying to solve for. So that kind of got us started, but where we really found the power in design thinking is in building new dashboards. So this is a real example. We've re-entered the mortgage broker market, and the broker team needed a dashboard to follow the new sales. So we engage our stakeholders right from the beginning. So before we get into data availability and feasibility and effort and all that, we just get all the stakeholders in a room and we whiteboard what they actually want to know. So literally on the left there, it's just starting with business questions. So how many sales did we do yesterday, last week, last month, last year? Very high level questions just to understand what they need from a business perspective to get out of the data. What are the insights that they need? We then start trying to visualize it. what it might look like in terms of a table or a chart or a Tableau dashboard. There's a careful balance here because we don't want to be so abstract that the team are just wandering about trying to figure it out themselves, but we don't want to be so narrow that there's no room for creativity, that there's no room to explore what's possible. So after that meeting, we draw it up on a piece of paper, what our dashboard's going to look like. We send it then in a PDF to the customers, and we ask them for feedback. So we give them a little bit of time to think about it again. What do they like or not like about this approach? But from the beginning, it has to be visual. There's no lists of requirements. It's all visual. It's all drawn out for them. And really, this is getting into the prototyping phase. So understanding through prototyping. And again, this is all before there's significant effort involved on the data side. Right? It's just exploring what's possible and how do we achieve the business outcome. We then start prototyping in Tableau, constantly involving the stakeholder along the way. So at every stage when we have a release, we show them what we've developed, and we give them a chance to feedback. We also, as we're getting into this stage, start getting the technical guys involved, start getting the feedback from our own developers in terms of what's possible, and we keep iterating until we have a design that we're happy with before we bring it into sprint. And obviously at this stage too, we should have our values signed off before we start developing. So the final example, I have one more slide here. So in summary, it took us 5 days to prototype that, which does seem like a lot of investment up front. But we had the dashboard, which has, I think, 10 tabs on it in production within 6 weeks, which is certainly a lot quicker than anything I've seen in banking, although some of you guys might move very fast. It's a lot quicker than we've ever seen anything get to production. And we did get, because of that 5 days, we do get pushback from the business, about that initial investment of time. And it's really just a matter of influencing, trying to sell to them that you're going to save time in the long run if you give it to us up front. If you come to that 2-hour workshop and we work through in detail what your requirements are and what you need from it. The final example, I want to give you something a little bit different. So last year, towards the end of the year, we, through our analytics community, ran a design thinking workshop, an all-day workshop off-site in one of our idea labs. We brought in our head of design thinking. She explained kind of some of the key concepts to this group of 70 or 80 analysts from across different parts of the bank. Really just to ideate on one topic, an initiative that the bank is running this year on financial well-being. So this is about financial literacy for our customers and our staff. The analysts had to go out and interview customers in advance. So they had to create a persona of who they were going to design the solution for. And then on the day, work through that process and come up with a napkin pitch. So something they could pitch to executives at the end, an initiative or an idea, data-driven, that could support this initiative. It worked very well. We did come out with an idea at the end of it, and it's something that's now in development. And maybe if it works, I'll come back next year and tell you more detail about that. But it's a very different way of looking at coming up with an idea that can drive value out of data, purely driven by the analysts rather than by the business. So where do we go from there? We have our design prototype now. How do we actually develop and deliver the product? So some of you are probably familiar with agile project management. We use the Scrum approach and have for a number of years, and we found a lot of value in doing so for analytics projects. I'm going to give you a quick run through of our implementation of it and where we're seeing the benefits and how it links into the other pieces. So briefly, waterfall is really predicated on the idea that you can perfect design up front. Whereas an agile plan is a living and breathing thing that evolves over the course of your project. We break our design into user stories in using the template right there. And and run 2-week sprints. The real advantage to us here is the idea that you can embrace change and adapt over the course of the project. This avoids us, going down rabbit holes. It avoids us building features that will turn out to be redundant for the customer. And it emphasizes collaboration through the whole project with the stakeholders, as well as the business owner and our business partner. So we run this through the ceremonies. There's 4 kind of key meetings that occur during our sprint. We have our sprint planning, where we prioritize what's going to be delivered over the following 2 weeks. So initially we do that on a project basis. My Scrum teams tend to take on 3 or 4 different projects at the same time and be in different stages, obviously. So we have a priority list in terms of those projects, which is obviously is about the value. And then we also prioritize our user stories within the projects to understand what should be taken on first and what's the most valuable features for each project for the customer. So this is where the developers obviously step in. They're going to estimate the size of the user stories, the complexity that's involved, how much effort is going to take them, and who can do them, and assign them between themselves. And this is where the part the developers love, the self-organization, the fact that they get a lot of control over what they do and when. We then run daily stand-ups. I stay out of these. I let the developers and the Scrum Master work together, and they ask three key questions at a daily stand-up. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And have you got any blocks? This is where the benefit really comes in for me. Because the minute something goes wrong, the minute there's an issue, I know within 24 hours. Right? And I can escalate it, I can try to resolve it, and if it's not, we can look at whether we need to remove the feature or we need to move on to something else. Halfway through the sprint, we do a backlog refinement. So this is where our business partners will present new ideas, new projects to the group. Also new features or changes that the stakeholders have requested. And we reprioritize and manage the list of what's coming up next. And at the end of the sprint, we have a review and a retrospective. So how we run this, I have about 16 developers at the moment, and we have our business partners then as well. So we all get together, about 20 of us in a big boardroom with a large screen. Everybody brings their laptop, and they take it in turns to show off what they've done over the last 2 weeks. This can be they particularly get excited when it's a cool visualization, or they've found something new in Tableau that they can do that no one else has done yet. But sometimes it's a bit of SQL code, sometimes it's a new data source that they've used, sometimes it's something that they've tried out in R or Python, sometimes it's an article that they read or a book. It's all about just sharing across the team, peer learning, and showing off a little bit too. Because the senior management's there. My most junior developers get a chance every 2 weeks to show off what they've done to the most senior people on the team. And we do a retrospective as well, I should mention. So at the end of the sprint review, for the last kind of 15 minutes, we kick all the management out of the room, and the developers just talk to the Scrum Masters about what they should stop, start, and continue. So how can they improve their ways of working? Sometimes it's about me, that's why I leave. They want to see more or less of me, or they want stakeholders to be more involved in certain projects, or or they're concerned about an issue that came up in the last piece. And those stop, start, continue actions go into our backlog and become part of the next sprint. So they're effectively actions to improve upon themselves over the following 2 weeks. So I want to talk a little bit how I manage the team within that environment. I effectively run with 2 different reporting lines within the team. In the top left, you see the functional reporting line. So this is a traditional reporting line in a bank. It's quite flat, I should say. It has changed a little bit over the last few years. So I have 4 or 5 direct reports, and then I have 2 people managers who manage the junior developers in the team. And that's where performance goals are set, and performance management and coaching and all of those traditional management activities come in. And then separately, we have what we call the value creation side, or the Scrum teams. So I have 2 Scrums at the moment. We're actually setting up a third. Each Scrum is composed of 6 developers and 2 business partners. And the reason why we have those two differences is really about flexibility. It's about being agile again. So if a project lands on Team Alpha there and it requires a SAS programmer, and I don't have very many SAS programs on my team, but there might be someone in Omega, so I can move them over. Doesn't affect their reporting line, their long-term kind of objectives in the bank, but for a specific project, I can move people back and forth. It also allows us to bring in people from outside. So go back to that kind of hub and spoke model and the collaboration. If we're doing a project in collaboration with HR, they can send someone over and effectively just sit in the team for the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, or how many sprints it takes to develop out their product. The other big advantage to me that I've seen throughout this is getting new joiners productive. So my team is actually quite focused at the moment on kind of senior managers and graduates, simply because it's quite hard to hire in the middle grades in Ireland at the moment. It's a very competitive market. And those junior people, we find we can get them productive in 2 or 3 weeks. And that's down to the fact that Agile allows us to break down the work into such small chunks that we can give them documentation work, or we can give them small asks in, to add filters or change variables in Tableau, or to write a piece of SQL, or wherever their strength is, we can start using them in that space straight away. So it's a huge benefit to me that we can start getting, assigning the most junior people to the easiest tasks straight away, and then keep reserving our more experienced guys for the trickier stuff. So on the stakeholder side, where the advantage for them is being able to see the output very early on, getting that incremental progress and hopefully incremental value as well. I mean, when we do prioritize user stories, we do look to show them, that if there's a table that's going to give them the sales by, the sales trend over the last few months, and that's the key statistic they want. We'll try to develop that and put it into production straight away, and then build out the additional features as we go and give them the value up front, rather than having to wait a couple of months to see the whole thing. They get that opportunity, obviously, to feedback on prototypes and constantly reevaluate what features they want to see in their product. So in the end, they should finish with a better product sooner. There's always a balance to be struck with stakeholders, when we're allowing them to embrace that change, that, we've got to put a line on where the scope ends. But that comes back to value prioritization. That comes back to what's the business outcome. So if what they're asking for is still to achieve that same aim, to achieve that same value, the same outcome, then we let it in. If they start going off and want to do something different, we try to create a separate project. So on the developer side, I kind of mentioned already that the agile approach gives that opportunity for to be self-organized. It empowers them to have control over how they're delivering the product, the flexibility. In the end, agile is a mindset as much as anything, and that comes into how we hire as well. We have to look for people who are motivated, who are willing to take on the self-learning, and who are very much team-orientated. Come back to that piece around the two Scrum teams. We do move people around between projects and that, so we have to be careful people don't get too attached to an individual project, and understand that it's the team who's trying to achieve, the team who's trying to deliver the value and the business impact. And they get a lot of feedback as well and exposure to senior manager on a very regular basis. This is my evidence for that. So we do an engagement survey every year, and this is the results for the group data office. We got 85% positive feedback in terms of enjoying working at the bank, hearing from senior leaders, integrating their work-life balance, being able to work without fear, and being aware of our purpose and values, which is a big thing that the bank is pushing at the moment. Come back to that strategy pyramid. So our engagement was 71% overall, which is about 15% above the bank and the industry as well. So the challenges I've kind of touched on a little bit already. The iterative approach does run a risk of scope creep, but if we keep our eye on what that business outcome is and what the value is we're trying to achieve, we can kind of keep a lid on that. We do request a lot of time from the stakeholders, particularly up front. But once they get through that first engagement and they see what the value is in taking our approach and how they will get what they want, hopefully sooner and in a better design, they tend to buy in. And a lot of that is down to that kind of management culture piece too. The big piece in banking probably with that is the fear of a lack of a BRD, a business requirements document. Because we don't document anything up front, we draw it out for them, draw a picture of what we're going to deliver, and we focus on what the value is and what the outcome that they need is. But we tend to overcome that by that learning from mistakes piece and the idea that they can constantly embrace change. And we do document at the end, so that is a myth we have to dispel, around agile. That we do document our calculations at the end. We give them a user guide, for a Tableau dashboard so they can understand how to interact with it, and we ensure that we retain the information for future projects. I mentioned too, one of the emerging challenges I'm having too is remote working. The bank's very much jumped into remote working over the last while. We encourage our developers to work from home at least 2 days a week. And the combination of the agile project management, a lot of introverts, and remote working is proving a little bit tricky, but we're getting over it through using a lot of different avenues for communication, through instant messaging as well as email, and Jira we use for agile. But it's an ongoing challenge, that piece. So I want to kind of wrap it up. This in summary is what our project lifecycle looks like at the moment. We engage stakeholders, understand the strategy, try to identify what are the decisions they're trying to make and how we might be able to support them. Then we get into our design and prototyping phase, or sprint zero, it's sometimes referred to, before the data availability and feasibility, getting into iterations of the product itself, and then validate and document and productionize at the end. I want to touch a little bit just on our infrastructure, in case anybody asks, but also to show you some of the impact of the return. We have a Teradata data warehouse. We also obviously have Tableau server, and SaaS Enterprise has been a kind of a long-standing part of the bank, particularly on the risk side. So the initial investment the bank made that I've mentioned a few times very much is in Teradata and Tableau. And by showing this 58 million euro return now, we successfully had a business case this year to extend, and we're bringing in a data lake, which initially at least is going to be on a Teradata basis as well, and Cloudera to build into the advanced space. Obviously, the idea is that this is taking on more complex work, getting into predictive modeling and prescriptive modeling, with the idea that will bring even higher levels of value and allow us to build further. One of the big challenges I'm finding in that space, though, is the fact that the business doesn't understand those more advanced capabilities. And while we have, I said, the open door, all of our execs want some analytics. They don't necessarily know what they mean by that, and we have to move them along that journey. So initially, as I mentioned, that can be getting them away from automation towards how we can provide them with new insight. Now it's going to be how we can go from that new insight to kind of more predictive modeling and drive their decision making and support their decision making with machine learning. On the other hand, we don't always understand what they need, and there is a piece on our side where we have to try to cross the bridge ourselves to an extent. That's where that design thinking workshop came out on, and we are starting to see, particularly in younger people we're bringing in, that they have a lot of their own ideas. And if we can kind of capture those and try to find ways of implementing their ideas, we have ways to go forward too. Another big success we've had in supporting that is a community of practice. So we launched this about 12 months ago, and we've run about 10 events so far. So the community really is anybody who's interested in data and analytics. We have about 500 people now involved, and they includes all of our practitioners, of which there's probably 200, and then people on the business side who are just interested in it from what they can gain from it, or who are interested in it because future career ambitions. So what we do is every month we run a lunch and learn session where we put out a big tray of sandwiches and get 2 people from inside the bank to speak about data or analytics related projects. It can be anything from new technologies that are being installed to something cool that they did in R or in Tableau, or it can be a specific project and how it benefited the business. And we also run evening sessions every second month where we get external speakers to come in and talk about what they're doing in their companies. And again, it's kind of idea of building on the ideas of others and seeing how we can use what other people have done. So, this is my summary. Always ask why. I think it may seem like an obvious one, but we can just, particularly in the data world, just rush to try and get our hands dirty with the data and exploring ourselves. But we've got to start with a business outcome. We've got to start with how we're going to benefit. Everything has a value. And obviously the other side of that, if it doesn't have a value, why are you doing it? Outcomes over processes. Prototype to understand. Keep it visual, and from the beginning we are a visual community here. Iterate with your stakeholders, and don't be afraid of it. Just as long as you keep your focus on the business outcome, we shouldn't suffer from scope creep. But you still have to know when to say no. And that comes down to the value and keeping focus on where you're going with it. That's it, folks.